I'm Greg Knazowitz. I'm a director of product management at Simperis. If you're not familiar with Simperis, we're a company that's focused in on identity cyber resilience and really making sure, if you want to put it in just brass tacks, it's making sure that you can always log back in and recover your enterprise if you happen to suffer an attack. So I'm going to give you what is a very shortened version of a longer talk, where we talk a little bit about some lessons from real-world cyber disasters. Some of these are from when our IR team has helped an organization. Some of these are a little bit culled from the news, but the lessons really ring true. All right. So you're in a resilience track. I'm not going to go through all this on the slide. I'm going to move pretty quickly and stay a little bit high level with some of this because there's a lot of content. But we all know the ransomware attacks, cyber attacks continue to increase. The news has bared this out over the course of the last year. You're reading the articles about the acceleration due to AI as well. And if you look at the data that comes back through that, really a lot of this starts with the identity plane, and that's how attackers are getting in. So the old chestnut of attackers are no longer breaking in, they're logging in, really holds true. We look at the identity fabric in a hybrid sense, meaning we know a lot of organizations have on-prem Active Directory, but they're also in the cloud. So they have Entra ID or they have Okta. We provide a free tool called Purple Knight, which helps you understand your security posture. If you look at the box on the top right, the average assessment score out of Purple Knight for a hybrid assessment the first time an organization looks at their posture with that tool is a 61%. That's just above a failing grade, really showing the exposure that exists when you look at the hybrid infrastructure. So why am I talking about posture when we're in a resilience conversation? It's because if you think about posture, you think about resilience, you really need to think around three phases. It's how am I preparing, or what's happening before the attack, what happens during the attack, and what happens after the attack. So before the attack, it's things like, what are you looking at for what credentials your users have, particularly those with higher privileges? What type of app accounts do you have that are in the environment? Do you know who owns them? What type of permissions do they have? App attacks are a really, really common way that people are getting into the organization. And data has shown that of the apps that are out there, on average, they only use 1% of the permissions that they actually have allocated to them. So it's really easy. I'm bootstrapping this app. I want it in my environment for my users. I just give it whatever permissions it have. I can give it. I give it directory, read, write, all. It can do all the things. Unfortunately, that's now a vector. So during the attack, what are you looking at in terms of the immutable logs that you're getting in off of the telemetry? How are you surfacing this to your responders? Whether they're part of your MSSP, do they have the right infrastructure in place, or if it's your own admins that are looking at this stuff, and how are they reacting? Do they have the rules in place to block? Do they have the playbooks in place? If it's something they can't block real time, do you have the forensics from those logs to understand what a potentially compromised identity did? Can you quarantine that and roll that back? And then after the attack, how do you understand everything that happened? And so you're in a good place to be able to talk to your cyber insurer. You're in a good place to talk to regulators if that's appropriate for your industry, and feed that all back in the virtuous cycle of improving. Super quickly, this is what we like to call the world's worst board game. So imagine yourself that you sit down with your cup of coffee or your cup of tea in the morning. You're just going to check Teams or Slack or email before you jump into work, whether you work from home or jump in the car. And it turns out you can't authenticate. You can't see any messages. You can't see any emails. So you might be thinking to yourself, maybe it's my home network, but Google still works. I can use all my social media apps. Maybe I've got the phone number for somebody in my team. I text them, is this working for you? No, it's not. So without those contacts that you have, without the ability to communicate, how are you going to bootstrap and start to pull your team together to respond? I think everyone across the industry pretty much has been beating the drum for a very long time of, if it's not coming from the internal corporate domain, don't respond to it. It's even happening outside of your industry. How often have you heard you've gotten the text from BOI or from whoever, we aren't going to text you and ask you for things. So if I text you and I say, I'm from the response team, I really need you to jump on this call with me and talk to me about your systems and the administrative access. Are you really going to do it? If you fast forward to that, if you can't authenticate, how do you get to your response plans that hopefully you've put together? So you can keep going through these chutes and ladders. And with identity out of the picture, life is solvable, but it's just all more complex and more difficult. And you're doing this in the height of a very, very critical situation for your organization. So you might think that that's all hypothetical, Debbie Downer type stuff, but this is all culled from real world incidents that's happened with customers that we've been working with or things that have happened in other parts of the industry. So we call that the lights out problem when you have difficulty because you can't access your identity infrastructure. I'm going to go through a couple of case studies. Sean's going to cut me off in the near future here, but I've got a couple that we'll go through that talks about what are some lessons that you can think about. The first one of these is about an organization that was attacked. Their infrastructure was taken over. They were going back and they were starting to recover. Now, this is a good news story in terms of a case study because as they restored Active Directory into a clean staging environment, they used the forensics information they had from all the logs. They identified where the attacker got in, and they used that Purple Knight tool I mentioned to scan their environment, and they identified that the vector for the attacker actually was still open. So they made the configuration changes that were required before they flipped Active Directory back into production, which meant that when the attacker tried to re-attack and breach them again, they were blocked and they were actually unsuccessful. So good news story. The lessons that you need to take from this, or organizations to help themselves in terms of resiliency, are number one, when you think about a recovery, it's not just, did I get my identity provider back up? Am I ready to throw it into production? But you need to think about it all the way through of, how did that attacker get in? Do I have the forensics to understand that? And have I actually closed that? Or do I still have malware in my environment and I'm actually just restoring malware and restoring access for whomever the attacker was? And when you're thinking about these and you're executing these tools, that's not just something that you're executing as part of the actual recovery. It's something that as you're going through your simulations and you're going through and executing that in advance, you're doing your dry runs, making sure you're taking it all the way through those steps so that in the heart of an incident, you know what that should look like, you know how to execute those tools, you know how to evict people. The next story that I'm going to give is an example of, here's the impact of when an attacker takes over your identity infrastructure and how you need to think about resilience across it, right? So this is a real example where a customer was impacted, the attacker had access to the identity infrastructure, and they were sitting on the Teams bridge watching the response team and understanding what they were trying to do. Fortunately, it was good operational excellence. I'll wrap up in 1 second. And so they were able to drop and they spun up a new Teams bridge, but they sent it out over email because that's what you do. The attacker saw the email, they jumped back on. So the lesson here really is you need to think about, when I don't have my core standard tooling, how am I going to pull my teams together? How am I going to be able to get that coordination underway to be able to respond during an incident? Resilience also includes the people, the process, as well as that tooling. So I'll wrap there. Thank you.
Thank you. That's interesting. I have to say, the increased complexity with remote workers is an interesting angle, particularly when they're relying on tools that have just been damaged. I also think it's nice that you can get a free tool that's going to help you that won't get Google ads pushed at you. Right, over we are now to Rob Cameron from Level Blue. If you want to fire away, Rob, give us a...
Yeah, hi folks. Rob Cameron from Level Blue, VP of Services. Level Blue is an interesting organisation. It started AT&T Security, got rebranded to Level Blue, acquired a load of different companies, so we're going through quite a culture shock at the moment, as you can imagine. Alien Vault, I'm originally from Cybereason. We also have Trustwave, Stoltz Freeburg as well. The great news is for any Level Blue customers is that we do the whole service stack, everything, from penetration testing, incident response, have our own EDR tool, co-managed SOC, you name it, we've got it. Please come and see us out in the booth and we'll tell you more. So, ransomware. So, there's good news and bad news, as I like to say to my children. Good news. There are several companies that have successfully navigated their way around ransomware attacks. You don't hear about them. You know, they don't make the news for obvious reasons, because they were able to mitigate and prevent and respond well to a ransomware attack. The bad news is ransomware is becoming ever more mature and sophisticated and using techniques that have are coming up new all the time, especially with AI as such an enabler. AI can be used for good, AI can be used for bad. So I wanted to just kind of take a step back and look at this from almost a victim point of view, because, my role in services is speaking to a lot of the IR guys and a lot of the guys on the threat intel, and a lot of the information I've got from them, is very much not to do what I would do in a situation like this, which is panic and, run to the bathroom, hide away for a little bit, which is the normal human reaction. If you understand ransomware, if you understand the background, the evolution here, and you understand where to go and have the right preparation, you can actually respond very, very effectively to it. So how did ransomware start? So it started with an evolution where it was just looking at anything where there's resources. So mainly financial gain, driven by money. Can we get a few bob here and there? Delivered by all sorts of other attacks. And it's evolved to what we have today in that fourth evolution: ransomware as a service. Threat actors, finding their way into an organisation and say, "Here you go, all set up for you. Off you go, Mr. Crime Group. You take it from here." Or we've got this amazing sophisticated ransomware we'd like you to try out. It's particularly good in the medical industry. It's particularly good in the retail industry, whatever it may be. And one key thing I want you to take off this slide as well is you're talking about unlimited scope here now with ransomware. It's not just about, to make a political statement. It's not just about, to exfiltrate data. It's not just about to cause chaos. It's multiple reasons and motivations behind why people execute ransomware. And there really is unlimited scope. The other part here is no one is safe. It used to be very much targeted at different industries, again, mainly resource-based, but no one is safe. It's pretty much touched every single industry. This stuff is real. It's not, it's not made up. This is just recent articles that I've kind of been told about through our threat team. Really, really interesting stuff, but very highly sophisticated. We've got some great case studies about some of the threat actors out there, and they really are, getting to new levels of being able to penetrate different systems. The one that springs to example is we had one attacking group that targeted an American learning organization, exfiltrated 3.65 terabytes of data. I mean, it's amazing, undetected, and the ransom's been paid. So even though we do see a decline in some ransomware payments, it's still very prevalent. And I'm sure if you can all look this up on your phones, I use the glory of AI for this one. The average payout in Ireland is €683,000. That's pretty significant still. That's an average payout, all right? That's just the payout. That's not about the damage to the reputation, the damage to the members of the staff, the operational costs, everything else that goes along with ransomware. So this stuff is real. Attackers themselves are evolving, as I said. You've got, it used to be kind of high octane, high impact, bang, let's get in there and let's do some damage. Now it's more complex. It's low and slow. It's designed to compromise as much of the targeted organization as possible. You're looking at all sorts of motivations, like I say, of why ransomware attacks happen. Is it IP? Is it personal identifiable information? Is it account credentials? In the case of that learning organization in America, all the university schools, all the grades, everything was out there and was threatened to be exposed. So it's that customer data bit. And again, if you go back to what ransomware really was about, it wasn't about data analysis or data theft really. It was about going in and making a quick buck. Things have changed very much so. So what do we do when prevention fails, and what happens when even recovery fails? There's several things that we can do. We can ask ourselves several questions. One interesting one here is, what can we do and how can we prioritize what's happened? And again, this is where a good recovery plan comes into place. Again, I go back to the medical industry. I don't want to pick on the medical industry. Apologies if there's any people from the medical industry out there in the audience. We had a medical customer again who was so concentrated on finding out what data had been stolen and taken away, they forgot that 70-80% of their staff can't log in and do their jobs. Prioritization here, making sure that you know what priorities to address first when you're under attack. Also, key stakeholders. Again, a different organization, a different sector, the retail sector. We had a customer who, only 3 days later contacted one of their vendors to help them with the cleanup. Again, getting your partners and getting your stakeholders in early, making sure they're engaged, making sure they know what's going on, making sure that everybody's on the same page. An effective IR plan is crucial, but also building in contingencies. What happens when backups don't work? What happens if recovery operations don't go as they should go? What can we do about that? And that's where a real kind of bulletproof and pressure-tested IR response plan works very, very well. And also plan for the next attack. You know, on the last slide there, I also put around the network topology. Know your network topology. You know, we had another customer that thought they knew their network inside and out, forgot about the staging environment. Attacker was just waiting in the staging environment to do another attack, okay? So making sure that you understand your network, making sure you're prepared for the next one. Again, pressure test your response plan. Consider working with a cybersecurity partner. There's plenty of them out there. Look at risk assessments and know what you need to do in a situation like this when you're really under pressure. Tabletop exercises are great. They replicate as close as possible to the real thing. Know how you react and respond when different situations are thrown at you. And the final slide here is about, or the penultimate slide, sorry, is about building resilience. Ask yourself the right questions. You know, what is modern cybersecurity resilience? Of course, and I should touch on it, prevention is way better than cure. You know, make sure you have the right cybersecurity techniques in place to prevent ransomware attacks and any other attacks as well. A very quick anecdote before I finish up. You know, I'm a father of 4 kids. I know I don't look it, but I am. I get the glory of walking into the school gate every morning. And one of the parents said to me, he works for a medical organisation in the US, I think we all know which one, and said, Rob, what do you think about this? And he showed me a picture. And obviously, it was a statement about what was going on in the medical organisation and saying, you know, if you want your data back, then pay X amount of cryptocurrency. And my first reaction was the wrong one. I said, well, you're not going to be working today. And maybe I was right, and he wasn't working today. But really, what you should be thinking about is, how can I respond to in this situation? And that's not just about the CISO and all the major stakeholders here. It's about us employees as well. How can we respond in a situation like this? What works? What doesn't work? How can I benefit the organisation? How can I get the organisation back on its feet? So involving the right people and the right stakeholders and the right talent, making sure that you've planned well, and making sure that the right technology is in place is really what will lead you to a successful response in any sort of ransomware attack or any cybersecurity attack. Thanks very much.
Well done on the time management there, Rob. Possibly because you have 4 kids. Next up, we have Andrew Grant from Bullwall, a regular contributor at this conference. So over to you, Andrew.
Perfect. Thank you very much. First of all, is anyone else cold in here? I think that joke's been done before. But nice to see everyone. My name's Andrew Grant. I'm Sales Director here at Bullwall. I'll take you through a few slides introducing you to where our technology sits in terms of the moving beyond prevention, adding an additional layer of security, and really building into that resilience and keeping an organisation operational. We are at booth 12, just down there on the left. We have one of our engineers who's available to do demos. He's also a Southampton supporter, so if anyone saw anything around Spygate yesterday, feel free to bring it up. I'm sure he'll happy to talk about that as well. So Bullwall, we're headquartered over in Denmark. We originate from an organisation called the NC3 over in Denmark, which is giving us our form of level of security around 7 or 8 years ago now. What I'm going to start with is the cyber kill chain, nothing that we've created, but just to show you the methodical steps that a cyber criminal would go through when they're trying to, 1, infiltrate the organisation, all the way up until payload and delivery of that ransomware. I think the 2 previous speakers have spoken a lot around how attackers are getting in, the damage it can cause an organisation, and a lot of the focus around cybersecurity vendors today is really around phase 1, or stages 1, 2, and 3, as part of that kill chain there. And that's really to try and block the intruder from getting into the organisation before he's able to actually deliver the payload or even move laterally across the environment. Stage 2 is that point when they've gained access, they're now moving server to server, understanding where your critical data resides, how are they going to exfiltrate that data, or even evidently deploy that encryption across the estate too. And point 7 is that point of impact. The payload's now been delivered, and how do we minimize the impact across the organization before we're moving to our backup and recovery technologies. So as a brief introduction to our technologies, they mainly sit across the last 4 stages of the kill chain. We have one product called server intrusion protection, one called virtual server protection, which are primarily around the middle phase. How can we stop that intruder moving laterally from server to server once they've gained access and they're already within our network. Our flagship product is called Ransomware Containment, or RC for short. That I said before, we can do a demo of on our stand. And that's really that worst case scenario when everything else within the environment has now been bypassed, the impact is real, encryption has now begun, and we're able to automate that process and contain the encryption from spreading any further across the environment. And that really builds into that resilience piece too. So when we were always speaking to organizations and trying to get this perception of moving beyond prevention and how do we expand that to something could get through. And for most organizations, it's now that mindset of when will it get through? And even if we're just looking at these 4 key statements on the slide, if a ransomware attack were to target your organization and your prevention strategy is all we have to try and block that threat, there's 4 fundamentals. The technology needs to be 100% protective. It needs to block all of the threats across all of the attack surfaces all of the time, which is quite a big ask for technologies to do, to block everything from getting into the environment. All we need is one of those elements to drop by just, say, 1%. We now have a vulnerability, a gap, an area for the cybercriminal to exploit within our network to really penetrate the business and essentially leave us not resilient at that point in time. So when we're looking at the 3 key steps when we're talking around resilience and moving from prevention to that operational resilience for organization, most organizations today will have an element of prevention. Most organizations probably 3, 4, 5, 10 different technologies to try and stop that threat getting into our environment. That could be a number of different flavors from your EDR, your XDR, your SOC service, your SIEM technology, anything to try and block that threat from getting into the environment. If that were to be bypassed, and it could happen in a number of different ways, whether it's through misconfiguration, maybe the agent's not talking back to the server, or it's been hijacked by the cybercriminal, or even a zero-day threat that the industry has never seen before is able to bypass those steps. Most organizations today are then reliant on their backup and recovery tools, whether you've invested in solutions like Veeam or Datto or Rubrik to really assist with that recovery process. But if you had a ransomware attack and it got to the data, there could still be that delta time to recovery, your backups could be encrypted, and that operational downtime still exists, even if you're looking to move straight to the backup process. So depending on how long that process takes, it would be a lot easier if we had that middle step. And it's all part of this operational resilience of when we see a ransomware attack unfolding in our network, not being reactive and waiting to go to our backup solution and hoping everything's protected. We can minimize the impact within the organization. It could be a handful of files, whether it's 50, 100, 200 files. But with our technology, the key part here is we're able to identify which user, which device, which files have become encrypted, and automate that process for you. It's now working with your backup solution on a subset of data rather than your whole server infrastructure to ensure you're staying compliant, you're operational, again, within the business, and saving a lot of costs from a downtime perspective. I know there's been a few statistics on the last previous presentation, but again, you can see the numbers there. 29% of Irish organizations in the last year have actually paid the ransom. The average, I think, a little bit higher than the previous statistic, but this one does actually include the additional costs. So you've got the knock-on effects, legal fees, rebuild your server infrastructure, consultants need to come in and help get you up and running again. The next one is quite relevant, especially now, but the date for the next 2 slides I'm going to mention is July 1st. So NIS2 is obviously, everyone's aware of NIS2, the compliance, the change of that perception of preventing a ransomware attack to having that operational resilience, more accountability when it comes to senior stakeholders in the business. But that statistic of 10 million, very similar to GDPR times around how much you could be fined if you're in breach. But instead of 72 hours, they've been very kind and given you 24 hours to get that back. And that opens up in Ireland on the 1st of July, which coincidentally is exactly the same date as Ireland get the EU presidency, which also opens up another element to consider when it comes to cyber. It's obviously a big political area for Ireland to hold across the EU. But with anything these days, everything has a knock-on effect when it comes to cyber. There's going to be that geopolitical spotlight. We've seen it in numerous cases of who's had the previous presidency. Probably the most reported one is around Cyprus, obviously a smaller economy to have the EU presidency. But they suffered within 72 hours, all of their critical infrastructure was hit by ransomware. And you can see on the slide there, I think there's just daily cyber attacks happening and taken across since they had the EU presidency. And that is a big area around critical infrastructure, the knock-on effects this will have, the target around the health system, rail networks, airports and aeroplanes to be hit by ransomware, and the knock-on effects of that could be huge. We also saw it with Paris as well when they hosted the Olympics in 2024. The knock-on effects of, I think it was 140 attacks hit French organizations, but even the year after they weren't presidency of the EU, they had an increase of 35% when it came to ransomware across the country. So July 1st, NIS2 is coming into play, EU presidency coming into play. It's a very apparent time to look at this from a cyber perspective, ensuring we have that operational resilience. And as I mentioned, we're on booth 12. If you wanted to see a demo, please come by. But I think I'm nearly at time. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Andrew. You obviously have kids as well. Yeah, look, I would reinforce what the guys have said, Rob and Andrew there, that the cost, the impact is absolutely eye-watering if you do experience either a hack or a ransomware. And it's the cost of services and recovery. And quite often the recovery is a lot more complicated than your backup and disaster recovery plan would have you believe. So we're over to Tristan from SonicWall. I'll let you introduce yourself there, Tristan. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tristan, Sean said, from SonicWall. Today I'm going to talk a bit about our Cyber Protect report. So to give you a bit of background on the Protect report, what we basically do is we take telemetry data from our hardware products that are out in people's networks globally, and we build a view of what we see for our devices and our appliances across the globe. So helps build out quite a good story of what's happening in the real world. Probably going to be a bit of a repeat of some of the stuff you've already heard today, but I think it just reconfirms some of those points. So I'm going to talk about some of the executive summary stuff. So intrusion hits year on year dropped by 0.3%. Malware hits year on year dropped by 13.8%. So when we talk about a hit, that represents every attack, every attempt measured. Ticks represent the number of hours during which one firewall is under attack from any given threat. Feel free to take pictures of this or come and see us on our stand. More than happy to share with you a copy of the report so you can take back into your own organisations. So then if we look at some of the larger numbers, so the 5 big numbers really, 13 billion high to medium intrusion prevention system IPS hits increased. So, you know, there's some numbers there that will give you a view as to what's going on. Again, copy of this report is available. We always see something every year when the report comes out. But I think what becomes apparent every year when we do this is we see a lot of the same thing. And a lot of it is predictable, preventable, and already known incidents and stuff that we're seeing. So 85% of actionable security alerts in 2025 came from credential and identity compromise. So attackers don't need sophisticated tools anymore. They're using a door that everybody's leaving unlocked. So, you know, the basics aren't being done. So what we've done is we've compiled the 7 sins seen in every breach investigation. And I'm just going to walk you through those 7 sins now and talk about each of them. So ignoring the fundamentals. So the number one attack vector is not a 0-day, it's a stolen password through an unguarded door. So we're talking about real basic hygiene within your security environment that you could be doing that isn't being done. Think about a fundamental that you could do that doesn't cost you anything. Any ideas? Something that you could implement tomorrow that wouldn't cost you anything, that would ultimately make you more secure. Patching. Okay, that's one thing that you could be doing. You know, Microsoft release all their CVEs every Tuesday. You know, go away, patch. There's no cost associated to that. Okay, 102 days average to patch in financial services. So, you know, that's something that could be done and dealt with quite easily. Sin number 2, this is always one of my favourites because we talk about this every year. This whole perception from organisations that they're too small to be a target. You know, we don't need to worry about cybersecurity. Why would someone want to target us when we've got an M&S scenario or we've got another large organisation? The fact is that small businesses are being targeted, they are being impacted, they haven't got the finances to, when it goes wrong, recover in a lot of cases, but they're not press-worthy, so they don't get heard about, don't get talked about. On the subject of Target, if we want an example of that, you think about the Target breach that happened a few years ago. Target weren't hit. One of Target's small third-party supply chain organisations were targeted. So they used them as a hop into Target's network. Didn't put segmentation in place. This meant there was a breach. So, you know, 88% of SMB breaches involve ransomware versus 39% at large enterprise. So, you know, one thing I would take away if you're sitting here today and you're an MSP or you're an end customer and you class yourself as a small organisation, get out of the mindset that we're not going to get hit, because the reality is you will. And it won't be might not necessarily be you that you're the target. It's going to be who your customers are, what vertical do you work in, because they're going to see you as an easier hop than going into one of those larger organisations. Overexposed access. So, you know, someone gets in and then you've not put in the right segmentation, you've not put in the right controls. Those people, those hackers can then basically go wherever they need to go. So if we look at 0-minute credential compromise via VPN, 18 minutes full network propagation, fastest observed, and 48 minutes for an average lateral movement to all systems. So, you know, making sure that once people get in, you've got controls around where those people are going, what access they've got, what they can't access, depending on who they are and what the profile is of that user. 44% of all security alerts go uninvestigated. And that's not because people don't care about the alerts. They just have got so much volume of noise that there aren't enough people to deal with it. So we're seeing more and more organisations adopt and look to third parties to help with that. Don't think that you need to do all of this on your own. You know, there's plenty of organisations, not just us, that are here today that can help with 24/7 SOC services, you know, managed detection and response services. You don't need to go and do it all on your own. There's too much to do on your own, so go and take up one of the services that are available to you to help with that. Cost-driven security decisions. So, you know, we see a lot of the time people going for the cheapest. Got to buy the cheapest product, got to buy the cheapest tool. You know, and sometimes deferring some of the really basics, you know, pen testing, skipping training, educating their staff. You know, the combination of not doing any of that, you know, ultimately means that you're going to be in a worse place. How many of you, who in this room in the last 2 years has bought a new car? Hands up. How many of you walked into the showroom and said, I want the basic, cheapest model that I possibly can get? No. You wanted aircon, you wanted heated seats, you wanted whatever else you guys wanted. But, you know, start thinking of your security in the same way. I want a service, you know, I want to only have a service that my network's managed 9 to 5 days a week. Reality is that's not enough anymore. You need 24/7, because if you're in the mindset that at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, someone's not going to try and compromise my network, you're unfortunately in the wrong place. Tools over strategy. So the average enterprise now runs 45 security tools. Nearly half of those securities pros spend more time maintaining tools than defending attacks. I speak to lots of organisations where they've gone out and bought other technology to solve a problem, but the product they've already got would solve the problem if they just understood it better. So getting their heads around what the technology they've got can actually do for them, and not thinking, oh, there's a nice new shiny product over there, I'm going to go and buy it. With the reality is that if they just changed how they had their initial setup and approached it in a slightly different way, they've probably got the tools already that would help them. Sean, how am I doing for time? I'll keep going until you tell me to get off the stage. So, Sin 6, reliance on legacy access models. We are seeing a shift, and it's an industry shift from SSL VPN. looking more towards a zero trust approach, you know, because there is no perimeter anymore. So, you know, you've got to look at a different approach. And we've seen that through the acquisitions we've made of zero trust technology in the last 24 months, a real demand for that and a shift away from that SSL VPN. And some of the stats there, you know, they support that as well. Sin 7, tools don't create outcomes, execution does. So our head of our cybersecurity, managed security services, Michael Crean, vast majority of attacks we're investigating are basic fundamentals still being missed. We've got so focused on AI that we're allowing it to overcompensate for the things that still probably matter most. So, as I've said, a lot of this is about taking a step back and looking at what you could do to simplify and make yourself more secure. So what does a protected organisation look like? So, enforcing MFA on every account, no exceptions. Whether that's the C-level that decide they want to have access to everything, you've got to put your foot down and ensure that doesn't happen. Fast-track patching, we talked about that. It's something free that everybody can be doing. You know, do that, make yourselves more secure. Segment networks to limit blast radius. You know, you shouldn't be able to, if someone does get into your network, be able to go wherever they want. Move laterally across. You should have rules in place, access controls in place to stop that being possible. Monitor 24/7. You know, not just business hours. That's really important for me. Test incidents response before an incident happens. How many of you do a dress rehearsal? How many of you have practiced? How many of you work in a building where you do a fire drill? It's not really a fire, but everyone goes outside, they do a little checkboard. How many of you have done that with your cyber resilience, your cyber platform? How do you know that your backups are going to work? How do you know that if you do have an incident, you've got a plan in place? Shift from network access, so SSL VPN, to identity-based as well. Look at the people, look at where they can go, what they can be allowed to do. And execute the basics completely before chasing new tools. Don't try and solve the problem with money. You probably find that just through some education internally, you could get yourselves into a better place. And finally, you know, SMBs are not failing because they lack security tools. The tools are already there. So operational discipline is really important. Making sure you understand your network, as one of the colleagues mentioned earlier, understand what you've got, understand where your risk is, and certainly think about the fact that you're never too small to get compromised either. And finally, for those of you that want a copy of the report, come and see us. It's a bit more in-depth than the 10 minutes I've had, but it will give you a good view as to what we've seen and changes that you can make in your own network. So yeah, feel free to come along and get a copy of that. Thank you for your time.
Sorry, thanks, Tristan. Sorry about that. I was going to suggest that all the speakers sit up on the podium so that the audience can have a good look at you, stare into your eyes when you tell them the answer they need. I just reinforce what Tristan was saying there about small companies are targets as well for good reasons. Quite often it's quite simply because you process credit card data, that's worth money. And additionally, also if you provide services to bigger firms, we've seen them where they're used basically as stepping stones because you don't have the same level of security applied as maybe your banking customer or your industry customer has. So essentially now we have a Q&A session. I would encourage you guys to ask questions because this is where you can get more reasonable relative information for your organization. And so we open it up to the panel. Fire away, guys. Any takers? I'll kick it off with a question to Semperis. You framed this as before, during, and after problem. What does real operational resilience look like across those three phases?
Thanks. So really it looks like understanding, you know, as you were calling out, there's a lot of tools in the situation that you're looking at for resilience. So it's understanding how all those fit together, and it's not just backup and recovery. It's executing your disaster recovery drills. It's understanding how the attackers are getting in and how you're going to respond and contain them. So it's that full wheel around it is how you have your resilience.
Valid point, yeah. Thanks, Craig. Sorry, I have too many things in my hand here. I just dropped them. So, Andrew, what's the biggest difference between resilience and traditional prevention strategies in practice?
I think if you go back to some of the slides I went through, what I'm talking about isn't to replace your existing prevention. They're very much needed. Backup's very much needed. But I think security as a whole is a layered approach, right? I think you need to have the right mechanisms in place, a lot of the stuff that's been discussed this afternoon. with additions, but linking the technology with internal procedures, making sure it's tested in terms of an incident response plan, what actually happens when something goes wrong and how you would react, and putting the automation behind that.
Very good. You guys mentioned, or at least I think it was, well, I can't remember what you mentioned about the fact that so many people now have like 47 tools, and yet, yeah, sorry, Tristan, and there's tools already there that are able to do something. Now, I would agree with this, that the techies like to go out and buy a new product to solve a problem when it's there already, and quite often you basically need to make them go and look at what they have and essentially try and not crowd the environment. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we definitely see it. Like I said, the amount of meetings that I've sat in where customers are considering new technology when they've already got what they need in place, they just don't know they've got it. And I think it's really important. And then we have the flip of that, where our core product is network security, so we're selling firewall technology, and the amount of customers that when their renewals come up, sit there and go, "Oh, we're not going to renew it this year. We don't see the value in the security services." And I mean, that's just naivety for me. What's the point? You're asking for trouble with that kind of approach, in my opinion.
Yeah, very valid. Anybody else have any questions they'd like? Fire ahead, please. I think Yusuf has a mic for you.
Hi, gents. Yeah, thanks for your talk. I just have a query. I was just interested to know your take on it. I was studying a case study as part of a cyber resilience course I was doing. It was an attack on the British Library Museum, or the British Library, I think, in recent years, where the attacker group did not only exfiltrate data, but they actually destroyed the server environment as well. You probably know that the Rosita group were behind it. I'm just interested to know your take on that. Like, have you come across ransomware incidents where the actual server infrastructure gets destroyed as well? And should companies have a duplicate of that, be that a virtual environment or not?
Yeah, look, absolutely. They absolutely. I mean, what I was saying earlier on about when the actual recovery plan fails, what do you do? When backups fail, what do you do? You have to be thinking of all these different scenarios, and that scenario talked about with the British Library, and the conversation I had at the school gate, very, very similar. That medical company, that was a data wiper attack. That's what they did. They wanted to make a big geopolitical statement of what was going on in the world at the time. They wanted to wipe data. That's what they wanted to do. So it's not uncommon for ransomware attackers to cause untold chaos, not just about ransoming and locking out systems, but they'll do other things as well. It's a combined attack. So absolutely having contingencies in place when backups don't work, and being prepared for the worst, because that really is the worst. And back to some of the previous comments about tools and stuff like that. Learning what you've got in your environment and learning the tools that you have is crucial, because they can save you. And the tools don't necessarily have to be technology as well. It could be great processes you've got in place. It could be great talent you've got within the organisation. Have that ready to go, and don't be afraid to use it as well in such situations.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody? Any more questions? Actually, to follow up on that, Rob, do you see any new trends that have been picked up in attacks recently?
Yeah, and I think it was alluded to by the other presenters as well. I asked the same question to one of the guys in the IR team, and he said, this is the year for supply chain. He said supply chain attacks are going up and up and up. I mean, it's always been there, and a couple of presenters, talked about some real-life examples, but it just is the easiest way to get into larger scale organisations and get to the real crown jewels, go in through suppliers of those big companies and get a foothold. And the other one I kind of mentioned in there as well is ransomware as a service is big. I mean, it's big news. You've got some really, really, I hate to use the word strong, but very, very clinical, cyber crime groups out there that just give you that foothold, or just give you that software just to go and do your worst in there, and other criminals are taking advantage of that, and that's ransomware as a service right there.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Rob, there. We've seen basically where there's one crowd that harvest credentials, and someone else that specialises in credit cards, and then there's people that gain access, etc. So and they're very professional operations. They're quite big as well. Very difficult for Interpol and Europol and those guys to actually shut them down. Have we any more questions from the floor? All right, you guys happy to hang on and ask a few more questions? All right. So Tristan, again, the report argues the danger isn't that AI isn't working, it's that what we're using is an excuse not to do basics. Do you want to have a chat about that?
Sorry, say that again. Apologies.
The report argues that danger isn't that AI isn't working, it's that we're using it as an excuse not to do the basics, which I do agree with you, by the way. What does a credible ransomware-ready posture actually look like in 2026?
I think for me, and we talked about it previously, is look at it, is it making sure you've got a zero trust approach. I think that has to be in there as part of that. And I mentioned it in the talk. Really was, rehearse pieces. Have you got a plan for if you did get compromised? And have you got a backup plan and a backup scenario and a recovery plan in place as well? Those three areas for me are important. I don't think it's one single solution. I don't think it's one single point. I think it's, like we talked about, it's layers. So making sure those layers are in place.
Yeah, so the traditional defense in depth. Any, still an opportunity question, please? Yep. There's a mic coming to you.
As everyone is talking about, obviously, attack. Thank you for this. As everyone are talking about, the attacks are no more breaking in, they're logging in. And you're talking about zero trust policies. And there's a massive increase towards like two-factor identification. And then you're talking about overcrowding with apps. What is the best approach? Just to remove the kind of human error aspect.
MFA. Absolutely, MFA. If you're on a modern phone device, use passkeys because it's not phishable or it's phishing resistant. So start with your users.
Yeah, I'm surprised at the amount of companies that still haven't implemented MFA, even on platforms such as Microsoft's. Yeah. So, I mean, definitely it's up there. It's another step that's very hard to break.
I think user training as well, and again, get them on side, get the employees as assets rather than, kind of vulnerabilities to the organisation, get them to spot what a phishing email looks like. I've done those training courses, they're boring as hell, but it does kind of wake you up, and also kind of remind them as well, Friday's a great day for hackers because everybody's thinking about the weekend. It's like, that's the time to get in, And another thing, just we probably haven't touched upon, don't also underestimate the inside job as well. It's about, I think it's about 20-22% of people that do it deliberately as well, and so again, having the right tools and the right safeguards in place. It sounds all overwhelming, but it is possible to mitigate against all these things. It really is. Just have to, the guys have said it, the right processes, the right tools, the right people,
Like I said, I think, just to echo what the guys have said, the education piece is massive. Talk about, you could have these 45 technologies or tools in your network, but if people don't know how to use them and you haven't educated your staff not to click on a strange link on a Friday afternoon, then that kind of, that's where it has to start.
I would think the battle as well, though, is we're teaching people to open PDFs, and at the same time we're telling them not to open them.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, ultimately, we have to have the training in place. We have to reduce the frequency, but we also have to realize that people are going to click things. It's very compelling. AI is just making it even more compelling and even more realistic. So having the response plan, having the rest of those layers for when it goes awry is how you end up resilient.
Thanks, Craig. Any more questions, guys? Just on the point, I received an email this morning from Microsoft with a nice code and everything. The email looked like it came from Microsoft, and the link I had to click on looked like Microsoft. It was really, really good, but it was to my non-work email. We don't use Microsoft on. So, now, having said that, I probably wouldn't have clicked on it anyway. But how you get your users not to. And I'll just give you a very small story from a colleague of mine, Alexis Fitzgerald. Some of you might know him. He's a cryptographer, but he lives in Switzerland. And regularly we'd have these chats. And one of the conversations we had, he came out with it and he said, how do regular users cope with this? He says, we're techies and we have a difficulty with it. So, I mean, we're dealing with that in terms of our user population. So what the guys are saying here about training, it's key. But like trying to keep them actually tuned into the training is probably harder. So unless we have any more questions, I think we'll wrap it up. Okay. I'd like to say thanks to Adam on sound and to Yusuf for his timekeeping, which is great because I let Angela go off with my phone, which is a mistake. So thanks, guys. And to our speakers, Greg, Rob, Andrew, and Tristan.